Oman Cherney. Sash, hi. Please forgive me if you can. But this time it didn't work out. I'll explain why. You'd better not count on me now. But I think there's still hope. You can try to do it yourself. Couldn't do it, but you can. I'll tell you how. It's a bad idea, a very bad idea. And it's not a good thing, no matter what you think it is. Quite the opposite. I'd never have suggested it if I'd seen any other way. But I don't. I remember the look in your eyes when we last saw each other and, well, please think carefully, don't decide anything in a hurry, don't run anywhere. It's me, a hobo who has nothing to lose, but at least think of Zinka and your parents, if any of them are still alive. Sometimes it's really better to leave things as they are, you know? I'll tell you everything I know. You know my address. And once you've read this letter, delete it. Anyway, when I was about 10 or 11, there was a story about our yard. I think I've known that story for as long as I can remember. All the boys knew this legend and many others like it. Several generations of teenagers were brewing simultaneously in a neighborhood built on the outskirts, experimental, as they used to say then. A road about 5 kilometers long led to the city from it, laid among flooded wastelands, which were also supposed to be built up one day. Schools, kindergartens, stores, a couple of clubs. According to the architect's plan, the cliffs of 24 high-rise buildings that formed the neighborhood were supposed to be autonomous. They were. Some of us went to the city for music school or to visit relatives, but most of us rarely left Zilmash. So legends about the black man from the local park, about the mystery of the old sewer, or here, about a secret passage in the corner of one of the courtyards circulated among the kids constantly, passed on from the older to the younger, along the way growing creepier and less believable details. Seriously, someone should write a dissertation on the folklore of isolated administrative units. But that's not my point. Not only the environment as a whole was closed, but also the courtyards themselves, into which the dusky genius of some builder of communism had sliced our neighborhood, sitting behind a drawing board. In the center of the square of long, contiguous corners of 9-story buildings, where all entrances went out, there was bound to be some kind of polyclinic, school, or other socially important institution, and outside of this fortress led a few arches, even though without suspension bridges. One might think that Zilmash was designed by a man who suspected that sooner or later its inhabitants would have to endure a circular siege of their homes. The story I am telling is about the corner nearest to my entrance, formed by the neighboring buildings. There grew bushes that faced the rear, blind storefronts of the drugstore and barbershop that occupied the first floors. At foundation level, a gap 3 palms wide and 1.5 meters high, half filled with broken bricks, remained between the buildings. There was a path along the shielded storefronts, but adults did not appear there. The gap allowed to cut the way, but it was impossible to squeeze through it and stay clean, so only we, children, used it playing hide-and-seek or war games, and adults had to walk to one of the arches to get to the bus stop. Right in front of the manhole, a square, the size of an open book, protruded from the ground, the end of a stone block or pillar, which had been dug in for some reason, probably during construction. It turned out to be a small pedestal. It was necessary to put some animal on it, the legend said, and then kill it. Then, at the place of the manhole, a passage would open up, not to the concrete area behind the bakery, as usual, but to a completely different place, to the dead world. Once there, it was necessary to find as quickly as possible a market stall with closed or painted. Here the versions were confusing. Windows, go to the window and clearly, loudly ask for what you wanted. You could ask for anything. A new Sega or even a computer. One boy was rumored to have asked for a real Jeep. And if you did everything right, then it will come true, only you have to run away quickly before the passage closes again. It's a typical story. Dark, violent, and silly. Just the way children like it. As proof of its truth, they always cited the example of an acquaintance of another acquaintance who had done it and it had worked for him. They also pointed to the concentric circles and scribbles that one of the locals had scratched out on the top of the column with a nail or a penknife, for the sake of plausibility. None of our company ever thought of torturing an animal to verify a silly story. We would have called the person who said such a thing sick and twisted our fingers. But Nika was not of our company. almost grown up as it seemed to me then, a very beautiful girl with copper hair and always broken knees. She came one summer to her grandmother, who lived out a long century in the next door, and immediately seized the role of Adamant of the yard, establishing its own order. We spent the whole month of July hanging around the neighborhood together. I think each of my friends had at least a little bit of a crush on her at that age. On one of the last long evenings before she left, we burned a small fire in the vacant lot, talking and baking potatoes and salt and foil that we had stolen somewhere. This story, among others, was told. And the next day Nika brought her grandmother's parrot to our headquarters on the vacant lot. You've already guessed, haven't you, Sash? Anybody else would have thought that I've lost my mind, or maybe drunk, since I'm seriously telling how a child's scary story turned out to be true. But not you. Yes, that's right. All these years, when the need arose, I bought a little critter from the pet store, one of those that are not so miserable, and went there. The crawl space and the rock are still there. But don't get too excited. Read the rest of the story first, because you're not going to get by with just one dead bird. It's never that easy, you know that. When, ignoring our protesting cries, Nika flipped the head of the parrot, beating its wings on the rock, we fell silent. Something snapped along with his vertebrae. Something right suddenly messed up. Nika no longer seemed beautiful to me, not at all. Though her appearance hadn't changed, the girl herself and everything around her had become ugly in my eyes. Especially ugly was the white stone with the corpse spread out on it, as if, say, it were made of swarming moths and gnats rather than ordinary reinforced concrete. At the time, I couldn't figure out where exactly this fracture occurred, inside myself or somewhere outside. Today I know everywhere. The confusion lasted only for a moment, and then there was a loud sound behind our backs in the silence. It was as if someone huge had smacked his lips and inhaled deeply, with pleasure. The air in the clearing among the bushes where we were standing floated, flowing around us. It rushed to the place where between the foundations of the two houses a vertical opening was formed, leading now into the blue twilight of some completely different, alien yard. In ours, by the way, it was just past noon. There were houses there, too. They looked ordinary, but they looked dusty and long abandoned, even ancient for some reason, like the pyramids in the pictures in a children's encyclopedia. In a slight draft, dust whirlwinds formed and disintegrated, and there was a chill. Not strong, but like what happens on a hot day near the entrance to a cave. And a faint odor. It was disgusting, somehow bitter and stale, like from a wet, overflowing ashtray or from a Chizevsky chandelier on. The rising breeze swayed the grass on our side and some colorless, dry straw-like stalks on the other side. I managed, overcoming a sudden spasm of revulsion, to grab Nika's wrist as she ran past, but she pushed me away and squeezed through the gap, into the portal. Why not call things by their proper names? She stood there for a moment, twisting her head around, turned back to us, and there was fear on her face, but delight too. Elation seemed to prevail. What are you standing there for? Come here. There's something here. No one moved. On the contrary, Kostya, the youngest of us, started to back away until he ran into a wall of bushes. Nika's red hair in the dim light behind the passage seemed to have faded to an unsightly brown. Stupid details, perhaps, but that's how I remembered her. Frightened and faded, somewhat cracked. "Nick, please come back," Anton said quietly. What? What a pussy. And yet you call yourselves men. Are you not interested?" Her voice came muffled. Intonation faded on the border. "Really don't. You don't have to go there, it's bad, you can see it. And it smells like a dump. Maybe it's radiation. We'll lie to your grandmother that Kesha flew out of the window," I said. "You'll say I let him out, you won't get in trouble. Let's go." If the passage closes, how will we get you then?" Our obvious alarm, of course, only made her hotter. We should have shut up or at least offered to come back later with a rope and a flashlight. But we just freaked out. And then she left, telling us to guard the crawl space. Said we were all suckers and she was going to go make a wish, and disappeared around the corner of the nearest house with black openings for windows. We waited for a long time, maybe 30 minutes, but nothing happened. Moving slowly, as if underwater, I circled the pedestal in a wide arc and moved closer to the opening to get a better look at the world beyond. There was a city there, true, but it was swollen and moth-eaten, monochromatic as dreams can be, generally similar to ours until you start looking at the details. Everything there seemed a little larger than it needed to be. The holes in the windows were bigger, the floors were higher, and I could probably climb into the iron trash can lying on its side. The lampposts along the roads were crooked and askew, emphasizing a perspective that was unpleasant to look at. The upper floors were lost in the haze, making the street seem like a high-ceilinged cave rather than an open space. There was no movement, and there was no sky, only a haze of shades of old slate in its place, and behind some panels rows of others stood, closing the horizon, forming a pressurizing labyrinth, the distant parts of which were swallowed by the same dusk and fog. Piles of fine gray sand were piled up here and there near the curbs, bent benches, and a couple of rusty car hulks. Glancing at the right angles, the walls going up and sideways, I tried to imagine how people walked here, lived in these entrances, and then suddenly packed up and moved to some other place. It didn't work. Instead, images of abandoned stage sets designed only to imitate an ordinary Soviet city for some long ago filmed and forgotten movie came to mind. My thoughts were shattered by a stunned scream that came from the other side, echoing in the void between the terrible monoliths. Nika was screaming, but her scream was so strong, so long, that in the end it became a growl, even a wheeze. You wouldn't believe, Sash, that a little girl could scream like that. There was silence for the time it took to take a deep breath, and the scream came again. Came closer. Nika was about to appear from around the corner she'd hidden behind an eternity ago. Seconds passed, and I kept my eyes on the spot, trying to make out something in the murky twilight of the dead world. Finally, I saw a swaying silhouette. It didn't look human. It struggled to move on short, stumpy legs, armless and asymmetrical, leaning against the wall from which it had just emerged. A cluster of squelching bags and lumps dragged along the ground behind the creature, alternately inflating and collapsing like a frog's goiter. Curving like a worm, it pushed itself off the wall with its whole body and took a few more awkward steps toward us. It screamed in Nikki's voice. The scream came from the disorderly pile of flesh the thing was dragging behind it. I shrieked myself and jerked back, the edge of a rock I'd forgotten about hitting me under my knees. As I fell, I dropped the corpse of the bird into the grass. The cackling sounded again, like a knife cutting off our friend's wails. Gradually other, normal sounds returned. The laughter of children from the sandbox, the chirping of pigeons, the voice of a woman calling for lunch from the kitchen window. It was daytime again. Rare dandelions swayed in the narrow opening, and a bus, shabby from life, was pulling up to the sports school stop. A striped cat ran past and sniffed through the basement window. Nikki was nowhere to be found. In tears, we alternately told the adults what had happened. First to our parents, then to a gloomy man in an unbuttoned police tunic, while the second questioned the neighbors. Nika's grandmother had been taken to the hospital. Her heart was failing. No one told us that we were lying or playing games. But they didn't take the kids' testimony seriously either. They asked us again and again if we had seen a suspicious man, and even described his appearance. They must have had a maniac on their radar. I escorted the policeman to the place where the missing woman had last been seen. There he looked around, turned his head inside the manhole, walked around the house, and wandered for a long time on the other side of the patch of land between the ends of the houses, looking for something in the grass. Then they drove off. The blue Wazik appeared in our yard several more times, but, of course, Nika disappeared without a trace. That summer, from time to time, I remembered what she had been like when she stood there, half-turned, calling us to follow her. At night, I dreamt of something else, something that seemed to be turned inside out, but still alive, but it happened less and less often, and life had prioritized. In the fall, my father left us, there were problems at home, and school was also in trouble. The years went by. The old company fell apart, There were new buddies already from other yards. I didn't remember much about the red-haired girl, but since then I always avoided the cursed place. Until I was 15. After my father left us, my mother started drinking. A little at first, locking herself in the kitchen after work. Thinking I was asleep in my room and couldn't hear her crying, sitting with a shot of vodka in front of the TV. Then things got worse. Getting drunk, my mother became tearful, apologized to me, promised that from tomorrow she would quit, but no way. A couple of times I got hit in the face by the men she brought with her. I tried to kick them out of the apartment. Then I skipped school for weeks to avoid showing my bruises. The vice principal wrote our family in the dysfunctional and finally gave up. By the 8th grade, the whole household was on me. I even learned to cook. Mostly to cook soups because it is nourishing and comes out inexpensive. I got a job at my father's friend's car wash as a runner when my mother was fired from her job. She drank most of the child support. My father was aware of it, sometimes through some extra money, but he didn't want to get involved in our affairs. I think he had a new family, but I didn't ask, and he was in no hurry to tell me. When I entered 9th grade, every morning when I opened my eyes, I truly hated this life. Sometimes I spent entire days in my bed, indifferently listening to my mother's new friends and girlfriends clinking bottle glass in the kitchen. Or as she vomits in the bathroom, yells at the TV, scratches at the door of my room. "Kalenka, Sonny, well, $100 is not enough. I'll pay you back at the end of the month. Do you want to go for a walk in the park later? Remember, you wanted to. I'll only go to the store and back." After another call to the ambulance, while my mother was sleeping under the drip, the paramedic told me, without taking his eyes off filling out the paperwork for refusal of hospitalization, that she would last another year at this rate, maybe 2, and then it would be necessary to call not an ambulance, but a funeral. In general, every morning in the 9th grade, I woke up with thoughts about the manhole in the corner of the yard and the strange city lying behind it. The legend was accurate in its first part, so why the hell shouldn't it be true in its entirety? I knew what wish I wanted to make. Only a miracle would save my mom, or rather, both of us. And if not, I didn't want to live too badly. I remembered all the horror of that summer, but you can't run away from yourself. The idea seemed more attractive day by day, Sash? One day, coming back from school, I found my mother on the floor at the stove, dead drunk, with her arm broken at the elbow. It seems that she was trying to cook dinner for us when she couldn't keep on her feet and fell. The sharp tip of the broken bone pierced the taut skin from the inside, and she didn't even wake up. It was a miracle she didn't have time to turn on the gas. After sending her to the hospital, I sat up all night without sleep, and in the morning I went to the pet store and bought an exotic lizard with the last of this month's money. It cost a lot more than the funny hamsters that fussed in the next enclosure, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them. It was easier that way. It worked just like last time. I felt the world crack again, but now the center of the rift was me, as it had once been Nika. Since that day, I felt worse about myself, like someone I wouldn't give a hand to when I met. I've become a bit unpleasant to myself. I don't keep my eyes on my reflection in the mirror. I'm always carrying this shit inside me. That's what's gonna happen to you if you decide to follow in my footsteps. I have a theory. It is that when you open the gap, you do something disgusting, and not even by personal but by cosmic standards. And it's not the killing of an innocent animal, which is necessary for this, but what happens afterwards in the very appearance of the gap. When I looked up from the stone, I wasn't even surprised. It was as if all those years hadn't happened. The city behind the gap hadn't changed a bit. It hadn't changed at all except for a couple of little things. I think time goes differently there, or even frozen in place, because the dead world isn't really an abandoned village somewhere up north. Rather, it's an echo, a dream of what our reality might have been if something terrible had happened to humanity, something we miraculously managed to avoid. Humans never inhabited these houses. They're inhabitants, they're different, and they're still there. When I stepped through the gap, the smell of decay and bitterness in the cold air brought back childhood memories. I looked around for signs of the creature, Nikki, that had come out of the darkness 4 years ago. Sand deposits seemed to form a slightly visible path that led along the wall and looped around the gap where the now long rectangle of light fell from. But it might have been an illusion or the natural working of the wind, and I saw nothing more. I had the lantern with me, but I did not dare to turn it on. There was enough light, even if its source was not clear. Soon I noticed that there was light in some of the windows. In one part of the building and in another, square holes without frames glinted faintly in the same dirty blue spectrum, as if TV sets tuned to the same program were working behind them. From other windows protruded long black bundles of something like the crooked branches of a dead shrub or the stems of mushrooms. Cold inside at every step, I wandered, raking the stinking sand with my feet, toward where Nika had run off to find a way to make a wish. Pressing myself against the icy stone, I peered around the corner. Nothing was still moving in the street. The road continued, blocked in two places by fallen lampposts, broken into pieces like ancient columns among the ancient ruins of a lost civilization. But for some reason it seemed to me as if something was still breathing behind those walls, and perhaps even watching the intruder from the darkness of the huge apartments. Gathering my courage, I took a few steps toward the center of the street, looking around tensely for possible danger. To the left, a little to the side, stood a gray cube of some kind of boiler or transformer box, with the gates open wide, as if in invitation, and half-covered broken wires lying around. Behind it began a maze of squat garages, almost completely hidden behind a thicket of the same bundles of sharp sticks, sprouting here and there like frozen explosions from the round holes of manholes with blown hatches. Whatever had happened here, it had happened fast. I looked ahead. In the distance, one house away from me, near something that looked like a mangled subway lobby, a spot of dim glow spilled across the asphalt. One of the streetlights was burning there, the only one as far as the eye could see. In the circle of light stood a row of ordinary market stalls. You know, the armored monsters with the little money windows that used to be on every corner, selling everything from chewing gum to scarce pantyhose. My heart pounded even harder, if that was even possible. So the legend wasn't lying about that either. To get there, it seemed it was enough to walk straight down the street past a series of entrances, some of which even still had doors hanging on one hinge. I must have let my guard down with impatience. Each blind doorway was about 3 meters high. As I neared the first of them, I heard something rolling around inside, bouncing off the steps. A worn rubber ball with a double stripe rolled out onto the road in front of me. I had one just like it when I was a kid, but it had gotten lost somewhere. Perhaps it had flown away from a strong kick somewhere into the bushes, and I never saw it again. Maybe even into those bushes in the corner of the yard. I won't bore you with the details of the fear I suffered there. The first time and every time after that. You'll see something of your own, something personal, and you won't need my experience here. Just be prepared for anything. Like in that ravine in the first Chechen war, remember? Then, after the shelling, you and I decided that now we've seen everything, we've been baptized, and nothing can scare us anymore. I don't know about you, but I saw a lot more after that, both in the dead world and in our ordinary world. Sometimes I even miss the war. Don't take this the wrong way, but I had friends back then, and we swore we'd go through life together if we survived, and we believed our oaths. Sorry, I'm distracted. It's been a long time since I've had a chance to have a heart-to-heart talk with someone. I don't know for sure if this world can hurt you, if it's playing games, if it wants to scare you, or if it's trying to make friends. I can only say that its inhabitants should be avoided. It is not difficult. They are rarely intrusive and almost never leave the dwellings. But if you see fresh footprints in the sand, or as if a strip, which could leave a huge snail, turn around and leave. Don't run, there's no need to run at all. You'll be back the next day. Every animal you kill will take a piece of your soul, but it's better that way than to be lost. Look at the picture in the attachment. I've mapped out, as best I can, the safest route. Follow it closely, even if any loop seems strange and unnecessary, especially if it does. Yes, at one point you'll have to enter the house. There's a breach in the second-floor apartment. You go out there, come down another entranceway. That's the way to do it, and for God's sake, don't give yourself a tour. But inside the house, just watch your step. Right under your feet and nowhere else. Ideally, close your eyes altogether. I've written down the number of steps you need. Learn them and count them. Well, there's not much left to tell. How I got to the stall and made my first wish. As I stepped out into the dead light of the street lamp, I could barely perceive anything. I was not directly harmed, but the human psyche, especially a skinny teenager like I was, is simply not adapted to bear such loads. My whole body was shaking, not believing that I had made it. At first, I was overcome with despair at the sight of a row of stalls. They were broken, ruined, and in some places looked through, just rusty frames and patches of peeling paint. A nasty mushroom-like bush grew in the floor of one of them, pushing the debris apart. Walking slowly along the piles of metal, I reached the last kiosk in the row, and though the light inside was off, I realized this was it. Welded from sheet iron like all the others, this one was intact. Even the windows behind the bars were intact, so dirty that I couldn't see any merchandise, if any, behind them. On a small semicircular window, behind which the cellar was supposed to be, was a yellow card with a faded, like everything else around it, inscription, "Open." Gathering my strength, I knocked on the window with my knuckle. A second later, it opened. A horrible stench washed over me. I had felt something like this once before. One fall day, I had inhaled deeply the hot, damp steam from a sewer in which some animal had died and had long since decomposed. The darkness of the iron box was not complete. Something vaguely visible through the window and behind the dirty, streaked panes rumbled heavily inside, making a wet, squelching sound. Huge, it occupied almost the entire volume of the kiosk. It was the salesman. Finally, the movement in the darkness stopped. Even if the kiosk had a door, I thought, this thing wouldn't be able to get out and chase me. The thought calmed me a little, but I was at a loss for words. My voice sounded strange and deafening in the middle of the empty square of this all-forgotten world. My mom, she's a good person, but she drinks a lot. Vodka, any kind of alcohol. She can't stop on her own because she's sick, and I can't do anything about it. I tried. The last I tried echoed out in the alleys and courtyards. I didn't get an answer. I don't know who or what I was trying to prove to, but the words just flowed out of me, and they were sincere. She'll die if this keeps up, and I'll be alone. We don't deserve that. I still love her. That's why I want Mom to stop drinking, so we can get back to the way we used to be. May I? I added, waiting for the mocking echo to die down again. There was silence. A minute passed, and I exhaled doomedly. What was I thinking? I'd fallen for children's stories. I'd climbed into a world where everyone had either died a million years ago or become monsters, and I was trying to talk to one of them. I had to save myself. Or maybe when I get back to the passageway, it'll be closed. The thought that I could stay here forever made me want to lie down and cry. Finger! The darkness gurgled. What? Finger? Finger. God, it wasn't even a voice, but I thought I understood what was being asked of me. I broke out in a cold sweat. Why did I even think it was going to be free? Did this shit look like a good fairy tale from the start? And if that thing bit my finger off, would I be able to get back out without bleeding out? Without giving myself a chance to think, I struggled to tear 2 long strips off my t-shirt, then pulled out my pants belt and clenched it in my teeth, folding it in half like I'd seen in the movies before my mom sold our VCR to someone for nothing. Clenching my left hand into a fist, I put my pinky out and stuck my hand right through the window of the kiosk, simultaneously clenching my eyes and clenching my teeth. Nothing happened. After a couple minutes, I dared to open my eyes. Maybe I had misunderstood and it wasn't about bartering? As soon as I took my hand out, the window slammed shut with a clang. The inscription on the card had changed. It now read, "Closed." Looking at my left hand made me dizzy and nauseous. The pinky was gone. There was no blood either, and the remaining half of the phalanx looked like I'd lost a finger a long time ago, at least a year ago. Deciding to deal with it later, I set off on my return trip. The gash and the clear sunny day behind it were in place. Sash, I've been wondering ever since. What was Nika's wish then? And what was really her payment? Further, I think everything is clear. When my mother came back to work, we fixed up the 2-room apartment, which was ruined. I went from being just a car washer to a mechanic's helper at the service station. I was assigned simple repairs, and paid, respectively, a little more. In general, the money became enough. I had to call my friends to dissuade some not-in-measure whorehound Hanuriks, who did not want to realize that they were no longer welcome at home, and life went on as usual. I learned how to do without my little finger in a week, and I lied to my mother about an accident at work last year. She cried again, of course. Mom died 10 years ago. Quietly, in bed, already retired. There had been no more drinking, and those had been the good years. There would have been more if it hadn't been for her failing health. After she finished school, the war came, and the military commissions didn't know who to take. You know everything yourself. Some came back, some didn't. We were lucky. That's where you called me Coca Bispalni. But at least now you know where my finger really was. Back home, I got a job as a car mechanic at the bus depot. It's not that big a difference between a tank and a Pazik, if you ask me. Life wasn't exactly going well, but I had girlfriends and our old veterans reunions. My mom bought a cottage in the suburbs to grow her tulips there. What else does a man need? Only in a terrible dream could I imagine that I would someday return to the dead world. But fate had it differently. You, Sashka, know now how I spent my little finger. But the last time we met you noticed. I saw that I noticed. Since then I've been spending a lot. I have 3 fingers left on my right hand and 2 on my left. And that's not all. 1 kidney, pancreas, and my left I can't really see. You can probably guess why that is, can't you? I think you do. You've always been the smartest among us, student. I haven't been a mechanic for a long time, you know. I get my allowance, I don't leave my apartment. I've almost forgotten what people look like, except for the girls from the social services. But I'm not offended. Don't get me wrong. Don't beat yourself up that we haven't talked for a long time. And tell our guys when you meet them, too. I wouldn't talk to myself if I could. When a year had passed since my return to the civilian life, and things started to get better, Igor didn't want to go to the next party, remember? And when they made him, he sat in the corner, pale, not even drinking. That's Igor, who used to make booze almost out of fuel oil. His wife, Katya, was diagnosed with advanced breast cancer, and he loved her madly. Of course, the one waited for him and she waited for him. I probably said too much at the time. I couldn't bear to see him torturing himself. I wanted to cheer him up. Everyone's mood was gone, we left early, and on the way back I bought a canary near the house. Breast cancer cost me another finger and another lie about an accident at work. After that there was a rumor, either in jest or in earnest, that he was a fingerless sorcerer. It was just as he promised. Not just remission, but like a wave of a hand. The doctors were shocked. Igor was lying at my feet while I didn't know where to put my eyes. Then they came back. Someone had a mother, an old man, father, children, especially children. That's when I realized that our world is full of suffering, and I could help where nothing else could. What's one of my fingers against someone's life that just started? Believe me, I thought about it a lot, looking at more and more short stumps. Stumps sticking out of the palm of my hand. I didn't agree every time, and when I did, I didn't tell you. Inoperable hip fracture, legs in crumbs, the guy will never walk, a finger. Sudden stroke, progressive dementia, another. Congenital cerebral palsy, total body paralysis, 2 fingers. Rumors were flying. That's about when you first came to me, remember? We got your Zinka back on her feet. I hope she's doing well now. 9 trips to the dead world, and every time a little less of me came back. And each time, as I stared at the opening passageway, some critter died in my hands, and a part of my soul died inside. 9 is a lot, Sash. I feel nothing but deep loathing for myself anymore. People can't look at me without disgust. They don't understand why. They feel what I've become, though they don't know why. Paradoxically, the more I helped people, the more alone I became. But I was prepared for that, it's part of the price. The only reason I haven't killed myself yet is because I can still be of use to someone else. what little I had left. And that's when you called again. I'm sorry about your girl. I really am. I hope they catch that fucking junkie and hang him by his balls. Believe me, I was willing to give everything I had for her. I don't know if it would have been enough, though, or not. Everyone else was alive, you know? Sometimes really bad, and then it cost more, but still alive. Still, I was gonna try. But the unexpected happened. As I made my way to the kiosk, I heard a soft baby crying. It was coming from the windows of an apartment far from my usual route. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to check it out. I dropped the cat, climbed through the window. A crazy risk, but I must have realized something on a subconscious level. It was Nika. How long had it been? Over 30 years. But that's by our standards, by Earth standards. How long had she been wandering through the monstrous, colorless emptiness among the dreary monoliths, from apartment to apartment, hoping to meet at least one person? I dread to imagine it. The main thing is that she's alive, and she's still a child, in a way. In her present form. Oh, you should have seen what her stupid wish did to her. What was it? Maybe something like, I want to live forever? Can you believe she recognized me? I never made it to the kiosk. I came back to send you this email. I'm sorry if you can, but I only have one chance left, and I have to try and save Nika. Bring her body back. Bring her back to our world. There's no worse fate than the one she's been dealt. I don't know what the price will be, but it doesn't matter. Even if I have to take her place, well, I'm ready. After all, it was my fault the portal closed back then. And I'm afraid I was the one who told the legend of the trapdoor that night by the fire, too. You have a choice, Sasha. Think it over. Sometimes it's really better to leave things as they are. I have to go. She's waited too long already.